Watched as my wife beat our monstrous son, and I couldn't bring myself to intervene, hoping it would save our daughter. I stood by and allowed my wife to almost kill our son. I was happy she did it. My son was very troubled. Very troubled. If you have seen the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin, it will really help to understand what I'm talking about, because I swear to God when I watched that film I thought I was watching a documentary of my life. I felt like the writer must have had cameras hidden in my damn house, that's how accurate it was. The only difference is that in the movie, the boy appears normal to his father and only reveals his true nature to his mother. With my son he didn't have that mask. His insane behavior was the same with everyone. From the day he was born, my son just came out wrong. He was planned. My wife and I tried to get pregnant and were ecstatic when he was born. He was wanted and loved. We showered affection on him and really tried to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he was miserable. He cried for 13 months straight. I'm not exaggerating, 13 months without a break. He cried until he had no voice left and kept crying. You could see his little face scrunched up and no sound coming out, totally hoarse. There were times he would literally be crying in his sleep. I've never seen or heard of any other kid able to do that. We brought him to doctors, specialists, tried changing his diet, held him, rocked him, toys, swaddling, music, mobiles, everything we could think of. Nothing worked. 13 months of grating, grinding, no sleep hell. Once he got over the crying stage, we thought we were out of the woods. But it quickly became clear that for some unknown reason, he was just angry at being alive. I never saw that kid have a genuine, joyous smile once in the time I knew him. I saw him grin a vicious, horrible grin many times, taking a perverse pleasure from causing pain or suffering or breaking a rule, but a smile from real pleasure at something nice? No, never. Not once. He had no interest in anything positive. He was fueled by hate, and everything he did was bent toward that. As soon as he could walk, his mission in life was to destroy things. He would break or try to break anything that came in his range, smash it, chew it, throw it in the toilet, whatever he could. After a while he figured out how to get his diaper off and took great pleasure in shitting and pissing anywhere he could. After a while he figured out he could hide it, and started pissing and shitting in places we wouldn't find right away, grinding it into carpets, making it even more of a problem to clean and making the house stink. When he got older, ages 9 to 15, he would piss and shit in our bed, until we got a lock on our door and he wasn't able to get in anymore. Then he'd just take a dump in the hallway in front of our room. That biological warfare started around 2.5 years old and he never grew out of it. I'll try to speed it up as I could literally go on for days about this stuff, but as he grew older, he became more and more unmanageable. He would bite, kick, scream, scratch and spit at anyone trying to do anything with him. He was kicked out of school twice before he was 9, then let him back in and then kicked him out for good. He had to change schools. The next step was to place him in a specialized class separated from other students. We had to install a locked door on the kitchen because he would take knives and use them to damage the walls and furniture or threaten people. When he was 10, he seriously stabbed me in the hip and buttocks, and I still have the scars. As he got older, his behavior worsened. He began setting fires and harming local animals. There was a stray dog that hung out around the park near our house. My son blinded it in one eye with a barbecue fork. He would dip cats' tails in gasoline and set them on fire. He became a violent, foul-smelling, vicious beast that lived in our house. We couldn't do anything with him. I will take this opportunity to preempt the flood of messages. Yes, we had the kid in therapy. He saw a psychiatrist twice a week and was prescribed numerous medications over the years. Nothing worked. Therapy didn't work. Meds didn't work. Nothing fucking worked. He was like a poison cloud of hate and fury lashing out at anything in his reach. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again. I can't tell you how different our reaction was. Instead of joy, we felt horror. This pregnancy had not been planned, and we really were at a loss over what to do. My son had been such an unending nightmare for 16 years, we couldn't take the idea of starting again from the beginning. We talked a lot about terminating, but A, access to abortion was not as easy in those days as it is now, and B, my wife was very against it. We talked about many options. In the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby, and if it turned out evil we would put it up for adoption. We knew we just couldn't do it again with another child like our son. We had a daughter. She was normal. Suddenly we saw what our lives should have been like the whole time, how things would have been had our son not been himself. She laughed at things. She breastfed without biting. She didn't have teeth yet anyway, but you could tell she was just trying to eat, not tear her mom's breast off. After 4 months she was sleeping through the night. She was happy. She was normal. I can't describe the relief and happiness that we both felt. I don't have the words for it. This where I believe I may have started really pulling back from my son. Up until that time, whatever mistakes I made, I had always tried to do the best for my son. I am convinced of that. I tried to help him and love him and care for him. I really tried. But when my daughter was born, my wife and I both instinctively just turned toward her. She became our focus, not from malice, but just because she was so much easier. She was so happy and sweet. Every moment we were with her was like magic. I understand this was wrong, but we honestly couldn't help it. I don't have a better explanation than that. My son hadn't given a shit about my wife being pregnant. I honestly don't know if he really understood it, but when we brought our daughter home he started acting out even more. I didn't think it was possible, but he took it up another notch. At this time he was 17, and we were having blowout screaming matches daily. Usually after we fought, he would storm out of the house and disappear for hours at a time, or come back the next morning. It was a relief. I started to actually look forward to our fights because it would get him away from us for a while. After the birth of our daughter, my relationship with my son was almost entirely gone. Our only real interactions were screaming at each other. My wife was even worse with him, she just had nothing left. By that time, if our son even came into the same room as her, she would just stop whatever she was doing and remember the feeling of desperation that had driven us to extremes. Our son had become so unpredictable, violent, and dangerous that we were simply trying to survive under the same roof. To protect ourselves, we'd fortified our house, thick, dense wooden doors bolted with keyed locks, not to imprison our son, but to carve out some semblance of safety for my wife and me. At this point, I carried a ring jangling with keys around my neck at all times. My son wasn't locked in, we were the ones who locked ourselves away, prisoners in our own home. On the day that changed everything, the morning had already devolved into a screaming fight with him, just pure, frothing rage, before he stormed out into the world. We never knew where he went. We didn't care. As long as he was gone, for that brief window, we could breathe. My wife and I snatched that rare moment of peace together in the kitchen, while our little daughter napped in the other room. It was the kind of quiet familiar only to parents forever braced for chaos, always a little too tense, always ready to run. Then that peace shattered. My daughter's cry ripped through the hall, piercing and wild, not hunger, not a wet diaper. It was terror. That scream hit straight into my guts, and both my wife and I launched ourselves out of our chairs at the same time. We reached the door. Locked. My hands shook fumbling the keys. Precious seconds ticked by, my daughter's screams intensifying, before finally the lock clicked. I burst into the room. My son was inside, looming over her crib. He'd jimmied the window open to get in. There he stood, a steak knife clutched tight in his hand. I recognized instantly it wasn't one of ours. We'd been forced to lock all our knives up meticulously, every one. God knows where he'd found this one. Maybe stolen from a neighbor. Blood streaked my baby daughter, one gash on her belly, one on her arm. Fresh blood smeared across her skin, running down onto the mattress. I caught him tracing the knife gently down her cheek, almost tickling, teasing her as she writhed and shrieked, terrorized. And then he looked up at us and smiled. That smile is burned into me, a hollow, alien absence behind the eyes. Without thinking, I moved. My wife moved even faster, faster than I believed possible. In a blur, she was at his side. She smashed his hand, sent the knife skittering across the room, and then hurled her body into him with such force he bounced hard off the wall. I scooped up my daughter, clutching her bloody little body to my chest while my wife placed herself between us and him. The smell of sweat, blood, and fear choked the room. I remember my daughter's tiny fists bunching in my shirt. I remember the dead nothingness in my son's eyes, like looking into a void. I watched my wife approach him, step by slow step. I could have stopped her, but I didn't. I could have pulled her back. I didn't. She paused, eye to eye with him for several seconds that bent time itself. Then she punched him, full force, square in the face. My wife isn't dainty or delicate, though she's small-framed. Since her teen years, she's been a boxer, hands hard, body muscled, every ounce of her trained to explode. At 130 pounds, she's all wire and dynamite. I outweigh her by 70 pounds, but I've always known she could overpower me if she had to. We had never physically struck our son, not even in anger. But something broke inside her in that instant, a tidal wave of years' worth of fear, pain, despair. When she struck him, his head jerked back and blood flowed from his nose. For the first time, I saw real shock break through his mask. She paused. And then she struck him again. I still didn't move. I didn't stop her, I just stood holding our daughter as my wife unleashed everything. When he tried to cover, she hammered at his body, his sides, his head, relentless, over and over again. He started wailing, real wailing, begging, screaming for her to stop, howling with fear and pain. The rawest, most authentic sound I'd ever heard from him. But my wife was unstoppable. At one point, he tried to hit back. She slipped the blow like a pro, didn't even hesitate. The barrage only intensified, fast and furious, her body running on pure instinct and muscle memory. I watched for a minute, numb and in shock. Then I turned away, carried my daughter to the kitchen, and began cleaning her wounds in the cool running water of the kitchen sink. I discovered a third cut, shallow, across the sole of her foot. All the cuts were superficial, thank every power in the world for that. I swabbed them gently, soothed her, wrapped them up, and rocked her until her sobs softened into hiccups. All the while, from the bedroom, I could hear my son's voice, hoarse and cracked, shrieking curses, promising horror on us, threats so vile they barely sounded human. And then the words faded, the pounding and screaming faded, until there was only the dull, thudding sound. I just sat there, cradling my daughter, while the storm finally wound down. Eventually, my wife emerged from the bedroom. She slumped at the kitchen table across from me, hands red and swollen, arms and face splashed with blood, breath coming in ragged gasps. We didn't speak. We just stared at each other, the cracked silence stretching. After a while, I asked her, "Is he dead?" She met my eyes and answered, "I fucking hope so." I nodded. There was nothing more to say. I understood perfectly. I felt the same. Eventually, she broke down in tears and stumbled away to shower. I stayed where I was, just watching my daughter sleep in my arms. Later, I heard moaning from the bedroom. When I checked on my son, I saw the aftermath, blood all over, vomit pooled around his head, his face a mess of purple and red, eyes swollen shut, battered in a merciless storm that I honestly never believed possible. The only thing I could think was that it wasn't enough. Even that was not enough, not after what he'd done. When I looked at my son, he was flattened out across the floor, swelling distorting his face beyond recognition. Both of his eyes were completely shut, starting to darken with bruises, his lips puffed up like balloons so that I couldn't even see inside his mouth. His fingers were bent at odd, unnatural angles and a sour stench revealed that he'd pissed himself. I suspected he might have lost some teeth, but couldn't find any on the floor. Later, my wife told me everything in detail, how she had broken him down methodically, beating every part of his body and focusing on his legs with single-minded determination. She said she kicked him in the groin until her legs were too tired to continue, and kept striking him long after he had passed out. After she came out of the shower, I stood frozen, clueless about what to do next. Should I call the police or an ambulance? Should I try to take him to the hospital myself? I was paralyzed, unable to see a right answer. Slowly, a realization settled over me, I simply didn't care anymore what became of him. My wife and I made a decision, we just let him live or die on his own. In our house, there was an in-law suite hidden away in the basement that we'd barely ever used. We grabbed our daughter and moved down there. The top floor, our home, became his alone. We locked everything down and severed our lives from his completely. He had food upstairs, enough for at least a couple weeks, and a washroom, and bedrooms. We had our own washroom in the basement, a modest kitchenette, and a separate entrance. We stopped going upstairs. It was final. I decided to let his food run out and simply see what would happen. During the next week, we sometimes heard faint movements above. I imagined him lying in bed most of the time, nursing his wounds. I went to work each day tense and wary, half expecting him to ambush me in the driveway. But he never did. My wife stayed home, always keeping our daughter close. At night, sometimes he'd go wild, banging and smashing things up there, but never once did he try to make it to the basement. I think he feared my wife would finish what she started. After 3 claustrophobic weeks, the house was silent from above. I waited a few more days before cautiously creeping up to the main floor, heart pounding. The devastation hit me like a wave. The place had been demolished. My son was gone. What he left behind was a nightmare. Months were spent scrubbing food and filth from walls, patching drywall, cleaning up broken glass. He'd torn up linoleum and emptied an entire fire extinguisher into the living room. I'm grateful he didn't light the house on fire with us in it. I honestly cannot imagine what stopped him, since he'd always enjoyed setting things ablaze. Even after he vanished, fear clung to me. Every day I expected him to ambush us, to come for us in the night. For 3 years, that dread lived inside my chest until we finally moved. Only then, when I knew he had no idea where to find us, did I begin to breathe easy again. All of this happened a lifetime ago. My son was born in the spring of 1971, my daughter in 1988. Now, I am almost 70. My wife succumbed to cancer in 2016, and my daughter, now 31, welcomed me into her home with her husband after the funeral. 2 granddaughters now fill my days with laughter and light. Still, twice a month, I see a therapist to talk about the shadows that linger from that time. I don't know where my son is. The last image I have of him is the ruined figure lying on the bedroom floor, battered and bleeding. More than 30 years have passed without a single word from him. I carry a twisted cargo of guilt and conflicted feelings. I didn't touch him myself, but I let what happened unfold, and at the time, I thought he had it coming. Part of me was glad to see it. I wasn't moved to end his life, but if he had died, I would not have mourned him. Still, a small part of me hopes he was able to conquer his demons and lead a decent life somewhere, far from us. Yet, if he never changed, if the darkness in him only grew, then I truly do hope someone out there killed him. When I knew him, he was a rabid dog, and I only hope, whatever fate found him, that he's no longer a threat to anyone else. Update 1. As years rolled on, the layers of guilt I carried regarding my son began to intertwine with a maddening curiosity. Where was he now? What had become of him? I often found myself scouring the internet for any potential leads, from news reports describing heinous crimes to homeless shelter records and even obituaries, but all I found were dead ends, tantalizing traces that never fully connected back to him. It was a ghost hunt, and he remained an enigma wrapped in shadows. Then, in a particularly wrenching session with my therapist last fall, she asked a question that unseated me entirely. Have you considered reaching out to law enforcement? The notion was both alluring and terrifying. For decades, we'd buried the horror. To dig it up in front of the police seemed madness. Yet, to possibly bring closure, to know, once and for all, whether he had metamorphosed into either a threat or a regrettably missed opportunity of redemption, not at me. After pacing for nearly 2 hours along the quiet, tree-lined streets near my daughter's home one evening, I made the call. The detective I reached was surprisingly empathetic and understood my tangled emotions. Still, he gently explained that unless my son had been connected to a recent crime, the resources available were limited. However, he agreed to check national databases for recent arrests under my son's name, or any matching fingerprints, and promised to loop back in a couple of weeks. During this time, life turned on. The usual routines of grandparenthood, reading stories, building pillow forts, and turning meals into messy, joyful occasions, offered a semblance of normalcy. But in quiet moments, my mind wandered back to what might have been buried in those police reports. Weeks later, my phone rang on a calm Saturday afternoon when I was chalking pictures outside with my granddaughters. "This is Detective Cole," the voice intoned. My breath hitched, and I hurried inside to a quiet corner of the house, away from curious young ears. "We have an update." My heart thrummed with both dread and anticipation. What came next was surreal. My son, it appeared, hadn't disappeared entirely. There was a familiar set of prints attached to multiple aliases. A transient, he had slipped in and out of arrests for minor infractions with petty theft and public nuisance over the years. His mugshots, each more hollow-eyed and disheveled than the last, were both shocking and oddly soothing. He was alive, living on the fringes, always on the move. Whatever darkness thrummed through his veins, it seemed as though he had somehow avoided spiraling into the full-fledged monstrous paths I most feared. There were scattered reports of violence, but nothing beyond the harm of petty crime, nothing that screamed sheer malevolence. Detective Cole mentioned no open charges of severe aggression, no violent sprees, just an endless spiral of disruption. I sat with the information, absorbing the spectrum of relief, disappointment, and unresolved anguish that threatened to pull me under. My son had lived, struggled, survived, yet was still a ghost, more of an apparition dancing in and out of visibility than ever before. What could I possibly do about that? The next step was the hardest decision of all. Should I try to find him? To see if any part of the boy who once squirmed in my arms remained? Part of me wailed for answers, ached to know, while another part screamed that I was tempting a return to pain we'd barely survived before. Throughout the week, I teetered on the knife's edge of decision. And then, life, as mysterious and indifferent as ever, made the decision for me. Late one night, as restless sleep was beginning, the phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered groggily. "Dad?" The voice on the other end rasped, pinning me to the bed with its gravity, deeper and raw from years and distance. It was unmistakable. It was him. What followed was an extraordinary 3-hour conversation, an emotional volley, both terrifying and bizarrely comforting. My son was calling from a payphone in a small Midwestern town. He reached out, he said, only because he'd learned through some grapevine of aged acquaintances, those with sudden brush-ins with his roots, that his mother had passed and he needed to hear from someone, anyone, about his past life. The conversation was jagged, broken, weaving through memories, some shared, some opaque, as if describing scenes from different movies. He made no apologies, sought no penance, just listened as I recounted fragments he seemed to have forgotten or purposely buried. The man I spoke to was as fractured and tumultuous as the child I knew, but somewhere in his voice lay slivers of understanding cloaked behind guarded tones. He wasn't cured, wasn't flatly normal, nor irredeemably monstrous. Eventually, the call ended, not in warmth or resolution but in a mutual chasm of unspoken what-ifs. Would he call again? Appearing, vanishing, perhaps throwing a message out into the ether when compelled. There was no conclusion, only a continuation of silence, another ripple in an everlasting sea of uncertain resolutions. The call didn't answer all my moral questions nor resolve the complexities of our shared history, but it confirmed what I think I'd known all along. Whatever darkness had consumed my son, some fragment of humanity lingered, struggling, drifting, displaced but not extinguished. And while I might never know peace from the knowledge of who my son had become, at least for now, there was a détente, a pause in the brutal, impenetrable animosity of the past. Perhaps, in time, that echo between us might evolve into something more than detached words over the phone, might bridge the chasm into comprehension. Until then, I clung to fragile hope, and continued to live. One spectral reminder, one uncertain step, and one breath at a time. Update 2. In the months that followed that jarring late-night phone call, life continued its unwavering march forward, yet the shockwaves from hearing my son's voice lingered, echoing within me. Every ring of the telephone seemed to carry the ghost of his voice, making my heart leap with a mix of trepidation and longing. I'd wake in the middle of the night, caught in the twilight realm between dreams and reality, and listen intently for the sound of his voice. But the phone remained silent. During the day, I immersed myself in the small joys of life with my granddaughters, appreciating their infectious laughter and innocent wonder, the purity of heart I had once hoped to nurture in my own son. Yet, beneath the surface, a current of restlessness gnawed at me. Knowing he was out there, flawed and fractured yet seeking something from our shared past, kept gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. My daughter noticed the change in me. She approached the topic with a gentle curiosity, hesitant yet understanding, as only she could be. "Dad," she quietly began one afternoon as we watched the girls playing, "if you ever want to talk about him, about how you're feeling, I'm here." Her offer was both a balm and a wound, an acknowledgement of the past she only knew through second-hand whispers and elliptical conversations. I wanted so desperately to protect her from the darkness that once engulfed our lives, to keep the fragile piece of our present untouched. But I also felt the isolation of my own memories, scraps of a story that I alone carried. The internet became my silent confidant. I often found myself scouring forums and support groups, connecting with parents, anonymous souls sharing similar pain, guilt, and confusion, sifting through the digital tapestry in search of understanding. Each shared story was a litany of sorrow and resilience, a testament to haunting questions of nature versus nurture. Why had our son turned out the way he did? Could we have changed it if we had been different, better, more knowledgeable? The debate unpacked an all too familiar labyrinth of doubt, leading to no answers, only spirals. About half a year after the phone call, another unexpected development occurred. I received a letter, the envelope worn and the handwriting deliberate, with each stroke carefully crafted. My name and address were correct, but as if written by someone who had to force themselves to recall. Inside, a single photograph fell out, cradling the faded edges of youth. It was my son, unmistakable despite the years. Weathered, hair longer, lines tracing his brow, there was a ruggedness to him, part of it hard and wild, yet another, surprisingly, holding a flicker of vulnerability. He was standing outside an old church, leaning against the sun-dappled bricks, caught mid-movement as if not wanting to be photographed, wearing a small smile that never reached his eyes. The brief note inside was unsigned. Thought you'd want to see I'm still out here. Once again, I was enveloped in an avalanche of sentiment, nostalgia laced with latent worry, interspersed with a strange sense of hope. He had reached out in a way that was deeply intimate, offering a glimpse into his world, however ephemeral. Determined, I began to explore potential connections the photo might reveal, searching for the church, the town. It seemed to be a place in transition, much like my son perhaps, old bricks meeting new streets, a tapestry of history and modern stories yet to be told. The location painted 1,000 scenarios, perhaps his home, a temporary refuge, or just another stop on his restless journey. As months turned into a year, the cyclic silence between us spun into an unspoken new normal. Whenever the quiet stretched too taut, I found myself scouring the internet for any mention of the church, scouring bits of information that might unlock another clue. Each search was a flirtation with unexpressed hopes and fears, of finding him. Or losing him again. Life meandered through its familiar rhythms, occasionally punctured by the discordant note of the what-ifs surrounding my son. Seeing my granddaughters bloom into the world with wide-eyed innocence, feeling my daughter's empathetic warmth, standing in awe of the strength and growth emanating from our family, each moment drew into sharp focus what had been saved and what remained a mystery. But that one photograph in a worn envelope nestled within my belongings served as a whispered promise, a testament to life's capacity for unpredictable grace, an echo that tethered us even as so much remained unspoken and unresolved. And for now, in this vast mosaic of lives intertwined from a distance, that tiny thread of contact represented an embryonic hope, a fragile yet unyielding lifeline that existed, against all odds, between a father and the son who had become both stranger and kin.